Hello, everybody. This is Philip Russom. I'm an industry analyst working for TDWI, and today I'll be moderating a TDWI webinar. Now, today's webinar is very special for two very important reasons. First of all, this is a webinar panel, and in fact, I'll be moderating a panel of 3 experts. So today, you'll hear from me, but you'll also hear from 3 other folks. So you're going to get a lot of diverse viewpoints, a lot of diverse information today. I think this will be very important for you guys, especially those of you working in data management. Another thing that makes it special today is that we're going to talk about the current state of data management, but even better, we're going to look into the near future of data management, especially for the year 2020. And in fact, that's reflected in the title of today's webinar, What's Ahead in Data Management in 2020, a panel of experts. So, all of you attending, please pay attention because, like I said, there's going to be a lot of information in here, and I also suggest you take some notes, and you might even want to consider following up with some of the companies that will have representatives speaking today. And so, another thing, audience, I just want to thank you for joining us today. We realize that you're very busy people, especially with the holiday season upon you. You've probably got a lot of projects to finish off, that kind of thing. And so we deeply appreciate that you could join us today. And also, as we work through the webinar here, be thinking about the kind of questions that you want to ask the panel. I'll be asking them questions, but at the end we'll have a Q&A session as well. So I assume you're logged into On24, and there is a place in the On24 console within your browser. So just look for a place to enter your questions, and as you think of them, please just go ahead and enter them into the system there. So how's this webinar panel going to work? Well, I've got experts from 3 software firms, and each is an expert in data management technologies and markets, as well as products, best practices, you name it. And to get this all going, I'm going to lay out some of the basic issues in data management as a way of setting the scene for our discussion, our questions, and so forth. And then I'll eventually introduce the panel members and start asking them questions about advances in 3 areas. You know, data management's really broad, isn't it? And we just can't cover it all today, but we're going to hit these 3 really hot topics. Number 1 would be new advances in data platforms. You know, Hadoop and data lakes have been with us for a few years now. We have relational database management systems. Both the older brands, those keep advancing, but the really exciting area would be the cloud-based databases that are available to you today. And you can use those for a wide variety of reasons, but mostly you would use them for data warehousing and analytics. We'll also talk about data semantics. You know, at TDWI, that's our umbrella term for a wide range of data semantics. The most common would be metadata, which comes in many forms, but probably the leading edge there would be the data catalog. Note that when we say data semantics, we're not thinking about ontological approaches to data semantics, you know, like the OWL standard and that sort of thing. We're really thinking of metadata and things that are similar to it. And then finally, we're going to look at data management very specifically for advanced analytics, and the hot area within advanced analytics today is machine learning and artificial intelligence as applied to creating predictive analytic applications. So we'll talk about the special data requirements for those forms of analytics. And of course, we'll conclude by answering a few questions from the audience. Now, I just wanted to give you a quick glance at who's going to be on the panel. These people will they will give their own detailed introductions later when we get to the first group of questions. But you can see that we got Patrick McFadden from DataStax, Bhupesh Malhotra from Grape City, and Colin Dover from SAP. Now, listen, I told you earlier, be sure to enter your questions into On24. And, you know, when you enter a question, you could start by saying, this is a question for Patrick or Bhupesh, this is a question for Colin, that kind of thing. So feel free to direct your questions toward a very specific panelist. Now, let me start building a background for our discussions, our questions, etc. I think if you work in data management, and I know many of you are business people who rely on data management to manage your piece of the business, right? So either way, you probably see that there's a lot of evolution going on today. Data itself is diversifying into a wider range of structures, sources, and latencies than you've probably ever seen before. Think of your own work. Many of you are dealing with unstructured data, multi-structured data far more than ever. Many of you have many new data sources. I know a lot of you work in companies that have modernized their portfolio of operational applications. A lot of you are going from older on-premises architectures for those applications to the newer software as a service licensing models, and of course that's cloud-based. And so a lot of you now have cloud-based sources to deal with for your analytics and data warehousing, reporting, and of course we all keep moving into more and more use cases that demand real time. So you've got the older batch stuff that's pushed to a higher performance through micro batch, right on up to actual near time and real time technology. So all that stuff is diversifying like crazy. And we all have to, adjust our data management practices as well as our tools and platforms that we use to keep up with the evolution of data itself. So I know many of you have already made commitments to new database platforms. You're deploying a wider range of platforms. The modern warehouse is a multi-platform environment, isn't it? We can see the same thing about data lakes and analytic data sets that are used for a wide range of analytics. So those have their own sort of new distributed data architectures, hybrid data architectures, and of course, many of you are adopting new semantics. You're getting beyond technical metadata to operational and especially business metadata and that sort of thing. And then finally, a lot of this is driven not so much by the data, which is, it's obviously evolving, but, the business is evolving too. Businesses are trying to be more digital. They're trying to be more agile and lean. They're trying to just get greater business value out of data. They're trying to be more fact-driven, data-driven. And a lot of this boils down to the business demanding more forms of analytics than ever before. And kind of the leading edge there is a lot of businesses really, really want predictive analytics. Oh, sure, a lot of our analytics that help you understand what we did yesterday or last month, that's still valuable and it's not going away, but you're going to have to complement that with predictions that allow the business people to see into the future better. Again, data management is so broad we can't cover it all today, and of course it's all changing. It's crazy. It's actually exciting. It's actually an exciting field to be working in right now. And so on today's panel discussion, we're going to discuss these three exciting areas I already mentioned: new data platforms and their architectures, modern data semantics, and data management for advanced analytics. So before we start with our first group of questions, let me talk specifically about data platforms. Within the TDWI membership, we saw a lot of adoption of Hadoop in the years 2013 to 16, and most of the time Hadoop did not replace a data warehouse or other database, but instead is an excellent augmentation or extension of those. For example, compare Hadoop to your average warehouse. The two have different strengths and weaknesses, and they're complementary. Like Hadoop is really good with unstructured data and file structured data. The warehouse is not so good with those. See what I'm saying? If you have relational requirements, and who doesn't, then a relational platform, a relational warehouse is really great. Hadoop is not so great for that. So it's funny, the two go together. A relational data warehouse platform and Hadoop actually go together very well. But we started to see a lot of disillusionment with Hadoop in 2017 and 19. I think two areas stand out. One is that it's harder to retrofit relational and SQL support to Hadoop than we thought, and once you do that, what you end up isn't as impressive as what we've been spoiled by within mature relational platforms, right? Another area is metadata. It's difficult to retrofit onto Hadoop, but HDFS itself is a problem. If you're successful with Hadoop, the HDFS cluster just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and as you add more nodes, you spend more money, and you get to the point where the HDFS cluster is actually kind of expensive in terms of hardware, personnel for administering the thing. We've had people talk at our conferences about how they have 1,000 node clusters of HDFS. When you get to that point, the electricity bill alone will break the bank. So we're seeing a lot of people trying to modernize Hadoop, and a lot of them are sticking with Hadoop. They're just going to do Hadoop on cloud instead of Hadoop on premises. But other people are leaving Hadoop for, especially for the relational cloud-based databases that are available today. Let's look at the data lake for a moment. Data lakes originated on Hadoop, but we are seeing data lakes progressively more and more on relational platforms, and quite often it's the relational cloud-based new platforms out there. I'm going to drop a few names, so that would be platforms from Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Snowflake, etc. So we're seeing quite a bit of that. And those platforms obviously can be used for the warehouse as well, not just the lake. So we've seen a pretty good modernization of the lake. We've seen adoption of the lake, but we're now seeing modernization of it as people understand that, Hadoop is maybe not the ideal platform for that, or maybe they need a mixture. Again, lakes can be multiple platforms, so some people may keep certain data like file-based and unstructured data for heavy algorithmic analytics on Hadoop, but they'll move other data to a cloud-based platform, or they'll leave some data, on the, on-premises relational platform. So we're seeing a lot of modernization of the lake there. And all the stuff I'm talking about today is not even possible without this whole new contribution we're getting from the open source software community. It's not just Hadoop adoption. We're starting to see Cassandra really picking up to the point that open source is a very much established medium for data management. I could not have said that 5 years ago. So this has been a big change. And also, open source is just different. It's helping us to think different ways, and a lot of technical innovations coming from open source. So in 2020 and moving forward, we expect more contributions from open source, as well as more adoption among people like yourselves of open source systems. And of course, there's the cloud. And boy, that has been a huge agent for change, hasn't it? And the cloud is becoming the norm for data warehouses and similar databases, especially data sets for advanced analytics. So right now, we see a flurry of migration projects among our memberships as they move the whole data warehouse or pieces of it, same thing with the lake. And so we think that the future of the data warehouse, lake, and analytics, we know that in the near future, all or most data for those will be on cloud. In fact, I ran a survey earlier this year in 2019, and of the people we surveyed, around half of them said that they will have more data on cloud than on premises in 3 years or less. All right, well, let's get to our panelists. And Patrick, I'm going to ask you to come in today as number one here, and then Bhupesh and Colin. And folks in the audience, what I'll do is I'll give these panelists a group of questions, and that way I give them some leeway to just jump in wherever they want to go. So the first group of questions is around these data platforms I was just talking about. So Patrick, what are you seeing out there? What new data platform types or features are you seeing? What's on the horizon? What's new about them? And also, how do these help to drive or enable business innovations? Patrick, can you take it away?
No, I'll take it away. Well, so first of all, hi, how are we doing, Philip? This is a question that we talked about, you and I talked about a few weeks ago, which I think is the most relevant and interesting question in data right now, is just the rapid pace of change. And I think we just had reInvent a couple of weeks. Every time Andy Jassy gets on stage, it's like everyone says, ooh, we got new things. Google Next, same thing. This is the world that's changing quickly. And I think the word that everyone is hearing is distributed and faster. So when it comes down to it, and of course with DataStax, we're very much about Cassandra, Apache Cassandra. We support open source to enterprise. We want you to be as fast as possible with your data, because that's the most competitive place to be. And it could be a lot of data. We have petabytes of data in some clusters. The biggest users of Cassandra are doing the most important things on the internet right now. And when we talk about like these new data platforms, and it's not just the storage, it's how quickly you can get the data from one point to another. Where is it in the world? That is actually one of the biggest problems right now. Is with global businesses, you have to have global data. And if your data is all stuck in one place in North America, good luck serving that in emerging markets like South America, APAC. Those are just too far away for you to have an effective relationship with your customer. You see where banks are right now. Banks are moving quickly from this old, stodgy mainframe and big data warehouse sitting somewhere in a central location to this really nimble, retail-oriented, customer-driven data. And it's data analytics on the fly. Using something like Kafka in the stream to move data from one point to the other effectively. You cannot go to any show anymore and not hear about real-time data. And that near real-time is what we want to see a lot of, because I think this is the future. It's going to be 2020 in a couple of weeks. I can't believe I'm saying that, but we have to act like it. If I can't have a flying car, I at least want my data right now, right? That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, it's great. Hey, listen, Patrick, I forgot to ask you. Can you just say a little bit about what's your role at DataStax and what kind of stuff do you guys offer?
Yeah, who are you and why are you talking? No problem. So I'm Patrick McFadden. I'm part of the developer relations team. I work with developers building these really cool things. I've also been a part of the Apache Cassandra community for years and years. I've been promoting Apache Cassandra as a database, data management, everything. I've been doing that for 10 years at least, and the project's been around for a while. So part of what this is what DataStax does, of course, is Apache Cassandra. We support Apache Cassandra in the open source. We support it in the enterprise, everything from, enterprise tools such as security and analytics. We have quite a bit to offer an enterprise that's trying to get into Cassandra and is just not sure where to start. We also have a cloud-based platform that works in every cloud. We try to walk the walk, of course, but we want the world to use NoSQL in their data solutions, and we think we're the company that can help you get there fastest.
Excellent. Thank you. Great overview, Patrick. Bhupesh, why don't you step up next? Now, Bhupesh, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What's your role at Grape City? What kind of products and services does Grape City have to offer in the area of data management? And then, jump in here with some of these questions. Take it away, Bhupesh.
Sure. Hello, everyone. This is Bhupesh, and I'm a product manager with Grape City. I've been with them, and I've been on both sides of the table, so to say, implementing data solutions as well as kind of asking for data to be implemented for the business. So I've kind of been on both sides, looked at both sides through my experience, and I'm right now managing the Wyn Enterprise platform, which is essentially a business intelligence platform from Grape City. What we offer in the realm of data is kind of the front end piece for customers. So the platform allows for collaborative self-service reporting and analytics with built-in tools for data governance, data federation, and scheduled distribution across your networks. We work in both as a self-service enterprise solution as well as an embedded solution within business applications. So that's about the product. Now, coming to what we saw here. Well, data platforms, as I'm seeing them, they are kind of going to the cloud. A lot of our customers are moving to the cloud, but there's still quite a few of the enterprises which are still on-prem. And that's not necessarily because they don't want to go to the cloud. It's because of some regulatory concerns or needs where we're seeing regulations around security and data privacy and all those things, which tend to mean it's not a cloud, it's more of a hybrid solution where some of their data and data warehousing and analytics is on the cloud versus others data sources remain on premises, or they move to private clouds. Either way, we are seeing that big increase in size and the speed and performance as kind of the biggest drive-throughs to get the data analyzed to be relevant to the business. And the main thing is getting those actionable insights for the business and that data size increasing. Like you said, the lakes are becoming more modernized, they are becoming faster, and they're becoming more feature-rich for the analytics to kind of get to the business insight that's needed.
That's great. Great summary. Thank you, Bhupesh. Let's move on to Colin. Colin, just tell us a little bit about your role at SAP, and then tell us what are you seeing in platform directions.
Certainly, Philip. Thank you very much. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Colin Dover. I'm part of SAP's North American organization, focused principally on data, databases, and data management. So I'm part of the platform and technology organization. I've been in this space approaching 25 years, started off life in the relational data warehousing and database space in the United Kingdom and Europe. SAP, hopefully most of you know who we are on the call today, and may even have some of our solutions or products. Most commonly, we're identified with the ERP world, but it's no secret that for well over the last decade, we've had an equal size and, in fact, a larger business over time that's focused principally on databases, data warehousing, the enterprise information management space, and then finally the cybersecurity, governance, risk, and compliance areas of information management. And that's really the part of the portfolio and the side of the organization that I work with most closely. I think as some of the other panelists have described, the sort of the what's new and the what's emerging is with the backdrop of the constant rate of change. Many customers I work with, just a few that I was with last week, we were talking about the fact that the change will never be as slow as it is today. And that as a backdrop sets the tone for the very diverse and disparate nature of the data landscape that most organizations are trying to deal with. I think for decades we've seen the desire and sort of the attempt to wrangle data, create monolithic warehouses, and put everything in one manageable place with the hope that it'll be of value to the business and ultimately serve their analytical needs. And the fact is that that fight is long over, I think, in many ways. And the reality that we see is, as opposed to disintegration and disparity in data, it's now disintegration but diversity represented in those various data sources. And really our mantra at SAP is about helping organizations get to a state of intelligence, to become intelligent enterprises, and that really being about getting their arms around data wherever it exists, persists, and making it usable and useful, as well as ultimately valuable to the business wherever it may be. So what's new about the platform, I think, is really the ability to embrace all of those different sources, to connect them in a way that is, as we would have historically referred to, either a logical warehousing approach or a federated approach, or quite simply an informational data fabric that can be created and interwoven over time, not making any enterprise think too hard about where the data is or how much to move it, whether it's in a lake or it's elsewhere. Really sort of slides into the background, if you like, and becomes the informational backdrop to the business. And how do those drive or enable business innovation? I think it really comes down to the fact that, as was pointed out, we're only weeks away from the next decade. And I think many of the methods, certainly that we still see in evidence today for data management, are reflective of a generation, certainly the one that I grew up in from a data management standpoint, where we're looking at a last century approach to how data is wrangled, managed, and distributed and served to the business. And so I think the future, and the business innovation opportunity is to get that full and complete interaction with all data, wherever it is, cloud, on premises, or anywhere in between and in any environment, and support the very fluid and fast-moving business requirements that most organizations have.
Excellent. Thank you. These are great overviews. Thank you, panel, for this. You're all doing a great job. And we're going to move on to a new subject area here on data semantics. But first, let me address the audience just for a moment. Now, audience members, don't forget, we want to hear some of your questions, and so we need you to enter questions as you think of them into the On24 console, as I mentioned earlier. Okay, let's take a quick look at data semantics again at TDWI. When we say data semantics, we're talking about largely metadata, but the new thing, cataloging. There's other stuff that's similar in there, like there's this thing called the business glossary, and you can get creative with all this stuff. But let's take a look at metadata. It's funny, people often ask me, they go, look, Russom, there's all this new stuff coming. Are we going to let go of the old stuff like metadata management? Are we going to let go of that? No, even with new data, big data, web data, analytic data, whatever data, we still need some kind of semantic layers over this stuff. And so metadata management, it's just as relevant as ever, but in a lot of ways it's even more challenging than ever. For example, I know many of you work with environments like the Internet of Things. And so I mentioned that earlier. We do have a lot of clients who are in truck freight, rail freight, other shipping, logistics. We have a lot of customers who are at TDWI who are in supply chain driven industries like manufacturing and retail. And in those cases, there's just more and more sensors all the time. And so you have all these new sensor sources coming online, and they're different sensor types, and they have different latencies and different feeds and speeds, different schema, you name it. And so how do you keep up from a metadata viewpoint? Well, a lot of vendors and some people in the open source community too are working on smart data scanning, and this is where a metadata tool can actually read data from a new source and deduce a certain structure from it, and then suggest those structures to a developer. And some of you may actually be using tools that do that today, but we're expecting more and more smart algorithms, so the tool can make that decision with even less human intervention. So that's where a lot of metadata tools are going, and it'll help you to onboard new data sources, which is one of the issues we're seeing today. It's not just the IoT environment. Think about companies that are doing multi-channel marketing. As you add more channels, more customer touch points, each of those becomes a data source. So that's one of the things we're looking for in metadata. And then also metadata management, it's like everything else. It has to support the new platforms that are on cloud and the software as a service applications. Also, metadata continues to be a foundation for other techniques. One that we see really continuing to gain adoption would be data virtualization. We already talked about data platforms and the fact that many environments like warehouses and lakes have multiple database platforms. And so data virtualization is a great way to build a virtual layer across multiple physical platforms, and those could be on-premises, cloud, or a combination of the both. They could be hybrid, as we say. So virtualization is something we see as being important, and a lot of times it's driven by metadata. One thing that's not on the slide here, many of you are still working largely with technical metadata. There are new business practices that demand business metadata, especially self-service data access methodologies. And so it's important for many of you to improve your metadata management. And then in a related area, data cataloging is coming along. And metadata names data structures, and we need that to insert data into the databases as well as to use queries and pull it back out. But the catalog's different. It doesn't necessarily name structures. It describes other traits. So you could describe the domain that the data is coming from. You could even score it. How high is the compliance risk? Is this a privacy issue? Let's put a metric on that. How trusted is this data in terms of its quality as well as from being known sources? And how usable is this data to certain user groups, user constituencies, et cetera? So really anything that you can think of, you can catalog it today. And so that's one of the cutting areas in cataloging. So you get the idea. There's a lot of new stuff coming along in data semantics. So it's time to hear from the panel. This time around, I'd like to start with Bhupesh Malhotra from Grape City. So Bhupesh, can you tell us what kind of changes are you seeing about data semantics, and how relevant is that, and how urgent is that for things like modernization? And especially, here, the questions on the slide here. What kind of tool types are you seeing, and how are these going to enable innovation?
Yeah, let me start with the kind of reiterating what you said. That metadata is kind of a basis. It's that technical layer which defines our data, and I agree, it's not going away. But we are seeing a lot of business context being added, and that's through these data catalogs and through other tools which basically describe the data. And not only describe it in terms of where it comes from and what it means, but it also describes what's the business relevance of it, what's the business context of that data. And that helps with a lot of standardization in the business is what we're seeing. I mean, we've been in conferences where we've been in hour-long debates about one data point. What does it mean? Sales will say it's something else. Marketing will say it means something else. But at the end of the day, it's the same number. It's just the perspective of the business. And that also kind of drives towards the fact about the tool sets around data governance that we see, where they help define, from the business perspective, they help define and unify these standardized labeling of data for these data catalogs. The other aspects that we're seeing tools being added to in this area are about natural language searches. So what that helps from a business perspective, and this is where I'm seeing a lot of interest kind of gaining steam here, is about going through the standardized governed data sets, which are cataloged with a business context in mind, to be able to find what they need, what data points, again, with the trust levels and the definitions of where they came from, what is the privacy or other attributes like you've said, Philip. But that searchability and that availability of that data in a governed, cataloged environment is what kind of is what I'm looking at in the next few years is going to gain a lot of steam.
Those are excellent. Those are excellent points, Bhupesh. And folks, did you notice Bhupesh was talking about how it's important not just to query through metadata and other semantics, but also to be able to browse data and also search. I think those are kind of end-user requirements we see a lot of. People want to be able to query, browse, and search. Bhupesh, you hit all those. And so thank you for mentioning that. Bhupesh, you also mentioned data governance, and I already see some questions coming in about data governance, so I'm sure we'll talk about that when we get to the Q&A. So I'll tell you what, at this point, let's move on to Colin Dover at SAP. What are you seeing out there, Colin?
Yeah, Philip, I think I'll echo some of the previous comments here, and certainly pick out one in particular, which is trust. And I think the recurring theme that we see at SAP in all of our customer conversations comes down to if you want to become an intelligent enterprise, or you're simply wanting to recognize the strategic value of data as an asset and make it something that's usable and useful to the business and drive higher revenue growth and do all of those great things that data should enable, the trust has to be there. And overwhelmingly, in spite of years and years of efforts in the area of data governance, metadata, master data, and other data management techniques, it's clear that basic level of trust in the business isn't always there. And so our view of this is broadly captured within our enterprise information management approach, but it's really about achieving data excellence. And as part of that, we see the ability to see the lineage of data, to score that data, to really see the heritage of the data, and how it got to where it is today within its analytics or within the analytical context. So I think the trend is against that backdrop of those very diverse landscapes that we've already talked about, whether they're cloud or otherwise. The fact is that we have to have that inherent trust. We have to have tools that support and allow us to enrich the data, build in the trust, build in the usability, allow, as you mentioned, I think quite rightly, the browsability of data, and it not to be something that's sort of shielded behind or kept behind the curtain of the data management label, but something that is transparent and exposed, and does allow for that trust to, as I say, be built into it. So what's new is really the support of diverse landscapes, moving away from strictly supporting the traditional data environments and technologies that we've seen in the past. And I think this all comes back again to essentially what we view at SAP as the critical point of value here, which is if we can't support innovation, digital transformation, and making that march towards intelligence in the enterprise through better use of data, then it's really all for naught. So the enabling of business innovation, getting to higher value use cases, and doing that in a way that says we have a high degree of trust in the data really the most critical part of this discussion, I would say.
Okay, excellent. And you're making good points about the trust of data. And in fact, I have survey data that shows that users admit that if they don't trust the data that comes from warehousing, reporting, and analytics, they're just not going to use the data or products built on it. So, yeah, trust is absolutely critical for getting full use as well as for compliance. So, Patrick, why don't you step in here? What are you seeing out there?
Well, yeah, so I guess I see things in a very different light, and that is in terms of the fastest moving enterprises right now. It is a changing world, of course, and I mentioned distributed when I was talking earlier, but one of the things that I see, especially in MDM, is how fast that's moving up the stack. And you're no longer seeing developers who just get a connection to a database. It is far more regulated in that regard, but it's also more of a self-service. So I'm talking about things like protocols like GraphQL and REST, where you're building in your data governance in the types of calls you can set, get, delete, update your data, and all of that stuff is happening for a developer at a level that they can use the service and move on. And this means microservices, which I have personally worked on a few projects where I almost had a little laugh because I'm like, this is old style data governance put in a totally different and new light that is much more usable for developers. No longer do you have to go back to, and I've seen these places before, there's like a cubicle in the back room of some IT shop where there's one person who manages all the metadata. This is the person you have to talk to. It's like going to talk to the wizard in The Wizard of Oz. Well, I think that is a way to slow down your enterprise to the point where you will be obsolete within years. And we could see that. So giving the power to these developers who are building things, but not giving them the free reign, like you can just do anything you want with your data. And this is when it comes down to understanding that schema has to follow all the way through your stack. If your schema isn't being realized in your microservices layer, then your application isn't going to be true to that. But if you want trust, make sure that it's all the way down. It's got to be turtles all the way down to the bottom or the physical data layer. So things like schema, which I mentioned, Cassandra's gone through a lot of changes. We enforce full schema for a reason. I think NoSQL has been kind of labeled as a schema-less database, and it makes people freaked out. Oh no, marshaling data, making sure that you have fake schema, totally important. But as you're filtering this up in, say, a mobile application or a web application, developers should be using the same API calls across the board.
All right, excellent. Thank you. And, thank you for bringing up a lot of topics we hadn't hit before. You really enriched things here. Excellent. Well, listen, I'm going to move ahead for the sake of time. Audience, don't forget, enter your questions into On24. I already see some really good ones that have come in. We're going to shift gears into data management specifically for machine learning and artificial intelligence. But, those two things, they're not an end to themselves. They're really there to enable a variety of predictive analytic applications. Let me start here by saying analytics, in my opinion, it's a big driver. In fact, it's probably the leading driver for change in data management. And it's because, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of business people are demanding new forms of analytics. And something we forget is that each form of analytics can have very unique data requirements. So as you move into analytics you've never done before in your enterprise, don't go thinking, I've done ETL for data warehousing for 20 years and I've got it all figured out. Well, you have a lot of skills and a lot of data integration and metadata management. A lot of the stuff of the data modeling, etc., all the stuff you already know is still relevant. It's just you're going to have to apply it different ways. And I guess my real point is you have to take seriously each form of analytics and figure out very honestly what is its unique data requirements, and don't go thinking you can build a low common denominator data warehouse for all forms of analytics. That's one of the reasons modern data warehouses have multiple data platforms and a very broad range of tools in their portfolio. It's because analytics is a much more diverse thing than that single word analytics makes us think about it. So if you're interested in some reading, and who isn't, you might want to jot this down. If you go to our website, if you go to TDWI, data.org/checklists. There are some new checklist reports, especially one by me, on the data requirements specifically for machine learning and artificial intelligence. So that would be a great follow-up for some of you to do some reading. So let's get back to our panel. So this time around, I'm going to start with Colin at SAP. So Colin, what are you seeing out there in terms of like data challenges for machine learning, other advanced analytics? What kind of analytics are you seeing most in terms of growth, and how are these driving innovation?
Right. I think this is one of the most fascinating points of discussion at the moment, certainly that I've been having with organizations around how do we take something that's otherwise been very much a science project approach to the use of machine learning, or especially to artificial intelligence. And it really comes back to this diversity of data discussion again that we started off with. And part of this is also how do you achieve scale in using AI and ML? How do you make it part and parcel of an operational use on a day-to-day basis of analytics, as opposed to something that requires a specialist either skill set, mindset, or data set? And something that becomes inherently valuable on a day-to-day basis within the common analytics framework, if you like. So that scale of AI capabilities, to do it in a collaborative fashion, to be able to design, deploy AI-based models, to use data science tools like those that would be found in Jupyter, to get those insights through machine learning, and to do it in a way that is, as I say, almost transparent to the end user, but is something that is inherently scalable and can be operationalized in a way that we've not traditionally seen AI or ML deployed. So I think that's the first part. The other part is the distribution and the distributed nature of data that we talked about earlier. Now, I happen to be working with a number of customers at the moment who all have a vision for the creation of a data fabric. One of them calls it a data tapestry or an information tapestry, but it's really the implication that there's a highly distributed data framework. The enterprise architecture is highly diverse and disparate, as we've said. But the discovery and the connection across those various data sources and types, regardless of wherever that data resides, is a key enabling component of that, or capability that they require. The refining and the reuse of complex ML and advanced AI as part of then the analytics that's brought to bear against those distributed data sets, and the orchestration in many cases of the routines, if you like, the pipelines that are established, the flows of data across those distributed infrastructural forms. That's really what we're trying to get to. So I think that's certainly the trend that I'm seeing. The challenge is very much historically that it's a one-off, it's a point in time, it's a specialized skill set, tool set, data set, and not something that can be achieved or delivered at scale. And that's really where I think the trends are taking us. And that, I think, in essence, is going to support a very different way of looking at analytics. It's allowing for more emphasis and focus on predictive analytics, certainly for those customers that I work with. That's what they're getting to. And then those in turn, in those highly valuable predictions, are supporting the business innovations, the new business models, and allowing them to get ahead of where they would have otherwise been. So I think that's really where we're seeing that trend take us.
Yeah, Colin, I have to agree with you when you say the shift is really focusing toward predictive analytics, and I think that is the business innovation many business managers are hoping for, because they're tired. They've driven the car while looking in the rearview mirror for years, right? And there is some value to that, and it's not going away. But they want to do more driving the car while looking through the windshield. They want to be able to predict customer churn before it happens. They want to predict fraud and insurance before it happens, that kind of thing. So thank you. That's a great background, Colin. Hey, let's move on to Patrick McFadden. He's with DataStax. Patrick, what are you seeing in these areas of in these areas of advanced analytics?
Well, in terms of making money, it is interesting and predictive, but I think the big shift in what I see is the whole mindset of what happened versus what's happening. And if you are asking what happened, that's a postmortem. You made a mistake somewhere and you're trying to figure out how to recover. And I see way too much of that happening right now. Or maybe you're just trying to figure out what your business was like you said, in the rearview mirror. That shift to what's happening in machine learning right now is interesting, but the most interesting thing is AI. And AI is getting ready to blow up in weird ways. And I know we keep saying that, it's the year of the desktop, right? But no, this is the things that are starting to enable and the parts that are coming around. And everyone who manages a lot of data needs to think about these things, which is 5G networking will open up all kinds of use cases, which will all have to do with one thing. There is something out there pouring data somewhere, and something has to process it, but also use that data effectively. And this is where the whole topic of AI will be a much more interesting thing. Up to this point, AI has just been more or less a machine learning algorithm that's interesting. But AI is going to be more of a sensing part of your data. And if you think about how you manage your data, from the schema to where the data sources are, security, all of those things, you had better be ready for that real-time part of it. Artificial intelligence algorithms will need to have lots of different input and really fast. And if you think about things from everything from logistics to even retail, the retail experience is moving towards more AI-leveled experience. Someone who's having a good experience will never know that an AI was involved, and that's that transparency. But all of that AI is driven by data so hard right now. So if we look in the years, like next year, the year after, all the things that are pointing towards this is the way all of our economy is moving to, which is we get to be more lazy and let machines do the work. All that stuff has to be managed with data.
That's great. Thank you. Good insight. Yeah, exactly. We're moving towards more and more automation, less human intervention, right? We want to build, and this is affecting data management tools. I mentioned metadata management. It's not just that tool type. Data integration, data quality tool types in particular, they're getting a lot smarter, like automation that can do automatic mappings from sources to target, and actually do it. They can predict what the target should be, right? There's kind of ML built into these tools. So we should expect our tools there, the ability to scan data, and the data quality tool can automatically know what kind of standardization has to be done, et cetera. So I think that's going to be the future of tooling, and it's not just analytic applications by themselves. It's also these miniature analytic applications built into a wide range of tools to make the data managers work a little more automated. Okay, enough of that. Let's move on to Bhupesh here. Bhupesh, what are your thoughts around preparing data for advanced analytics?
Yeah, so the challenge with going third, is that most of the stuff is already covered. So Colin and Patrick, they've really laid out the needs of predictive analytics and kind of where the speed of data is going at. But one area which I see a lot of work happening towards is the data quality and automation of that aspect of the data pipeline. Now, a lot of the data that we get, like Colin mentioned, it's distributed. There's a lot of data coming from different aspects, and Patrick also mentioned that with the age of 5G and Internet of Things and smart apps and all. But the quality of the data, is it trustworthy? Is it factual? Those are things that you need somebody to go through. And at the moment, a lot of that is manual. And I see a lot of investments going in the aspects of data ops. We're looking at automation through machine learning and AI even towards automating this pipeline to make it closer to real time, like Patrick is saying. So you can actually do those predictive models with trustworthy and quality data. That, I think, is a key challenge that people will be addressing. Now, some of the enterprises will go faster, some will go slower. So it's really dependent on how fast they go as to which aspect of the data management they would be addressing with machine learning and advanced analytics.
All right, excellent. Well, very good. To keep us on time today, I'm going to move into the Q&A session. And folks, many of you have already entered some questions into the On24 console, and thank you. There's some great ones in here. And so we're going to get to as many of these as we can. And you know, Bhupesh was just talking. Bhupesh is from Grape City. Bhupesh, there's actually a question here directed straight to you. And the question, I'm going to paraphrase it. It says, this is a question for Bhupesh. I'd like to hear his experience with various data catalog solutions or something similar. Bhupesh, do you have anything to add about data cataloging?
So data cataloging, like we talked about, and it's not only about adding kind of a business layer above the metadata. It's also about using that and making it relevant to the business. So there was another question that I was looking at, Philip, here, which was similar in terms of how governance would be added with or would be provided with data catalogs or not. And that also, I think it's the other way around. Data catalog facilitates or helps with the governance, I think. And there are a lot of tools out there, and I've looked through a few of them, but it really ends up with what is it that the business needs? What's the need of the business? What's the primary way of the functioning of the business when it comes to using the data catalog? There are businesses out there or organizations out there where the culture is more collaborative, where they want to contribute to a data catalog as individual business owners and business users to say how to kind of rate how trustworthy that data is and how that works. So there you would go for a tool which is more collaborative in its feature set. There's others which are more driven by the governance aspects, where there's a committee or center of excellence which basically works out the kinks about all the data, figures out how to get all this data organized in a way and cataloged and labeled in a way that is useful for the system. So that's kind of a top-down type approach. So those tools would be more driven with security, with more from a metadata aspect towards the business explanation of that data in a data catalog. So it really depends on where you're coming at data catalog from, whether it's a bottom-up from a business user's contribution perspective or a top-down from an organizational and data governance perspective. The data cataloging is essentially a way to essentially educate and provide data literacy to the business users when they are kind of making their decisions.
Wow, that's a long list of tips and insights. Thank you, Bhupesh. That was a great deep dive into the data catalog. Hey, listen, Patrick McFadden from DataStax, I'd like to ask you to jump in here because there's a question about open source, and I know at DataStax you guys are working with Cassandra and other open source. So the question is how the open source development would address data governance and, more importantly, metadata management. So that, you know, those things from an open source viewpoint. I also know, I think you guys have a solution around master data management as well. So is there some area in there you can jump in and share some insights?
Well, yeah, there's this is like one of those broadest of topics, because when you talk about open source, there's a lot of little things out there to do this. But in terms of open source development around data governance, you can see there's a theme that's rippling through most of the data product land in open source. For instance, with Cassandra, schema management is probably one of the top in mind. We're getting ready to release 4.0 in the Apache project, and concurrent schema management is a huge concern. If you look at Kafka now has a fully baked schema manager built into it for data governance. And that's based on an Avro data model. I believe there's a couple of projects in Apache incubating right now that have that are in this metadata management space. And if you look at Spark, you look at Hadoop, all these projects are maturing quickly, and I don't think it's optional anymore. As I mentioned before, these are moving up the stack, but no longer, and I go back to this, I think in the early days, open source data was schemaless. Those days are over right now. Those are probably the most specific things I could talk about. I know and I can't remember which Apache project it is, but there's one out there now, and I just was learning about it a few months ago, that is actually for this one thing of metadata management.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you for that. Hey, listen, I'm going to just go to the next question here, and Colin, I'd like you to take this one. So this will be for Colin Dover at SAP. I'll paraphrase the question for you. Will the future data platform be a logical construct or a physical platform? And so, Colin, if I think about the SAP offering, I know you guys have announced your new concept of the modern data hub, which is not so much about persisting data; it's more about being a virtual approach to a lot of data. And obviously, there's some functionality within the HANA product line. So you can talk about those products or anything you want. What do you think is the future data platform? And here we could think that platform will be for data warehousing or analytics. Is that future platform going to be logical, physical? Personally, I think it's probably going to be a hybrid mix. But what do you think?
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think the answer starts there, Philip, as you said. It's a combination. But I think decades ago I was inspired by this idea that came out of Silicon Valley about ambient computing, and that we would see effectively the environment around us being a compute fabric. And it's kind of interesting that 20 plus years later, we're surrounded by, the various sensoria that we have. We've got these various computing technologies. We've got the cloud being a direction that many are moving towards. But as you said earlier, we're not throwing away the baby and the bathwater in terms of the legacy technologies and data platforms. And our approach and philosophy at SAP is one of realizing and accepting and expecting that every organization is going to have that very complex and diverse data landscape, as I've said a number of times today. And the balance of those two will shift over time, but they may shift back again. And so the important thing for us to do is provide technologies, HANA as a platform approach to a database that's in memory, that offers that incredible degree of performance, and combines that with data management techniques and advanced analytical capabilities in terms of graphing and spatial awareness and everything else, inclusive of prediction that you would expect to be able to do to the data that's coming into memory. That's just one way that we can do that. The other is that we can apply what we call data hub or data intelligence to that diverse landscape, create those orchestrated pipelines. And I think one of the key things I'll go back to quickly. I think it was Arthur C. Clarke, a fellow Englishman, at some point said, sufficiently advanced technology at some point will take on the appearance of magic. And I may be paraphrasing here, but I think that's the point that we've reached in many ways with these topics, Philip, that we're starting to see this seamless integration and management. We're starting to see a very instinctive use within the business of data that otherwise would have been the preserve of data scientists a number of years ago. And we've got these self-training ML and AI models and routines that are constantly improving. And so this notion of sort of the black and the white, and I saw one of the other questions here, the black box, white box AI sort of dilemma, in many ways it's becoming the gray box discussion. And I think that's where we see, and certainly our focus on between data intelligence, HANA as a platform, and the various other technologies that go into our database and data management portfolio. It's all about as little as possible distinguishing between the different types and natures of data, but leveraging them fully to, most importantly, support business innovation. And as you said, getting out of the rear view mirror, although it's relevant and valuable in some cases, but selling the prediction or building a business on the prediction of the future is really where most of our customers are trying to get to. And the only way to do that is through the richest data sets and the fullest coverage and connection to those data sets. And that's where we get the intelligent enterprise.
Excellent. Great survey of the future for a lot of these technologies we've been talking today. That makes a good ending. But, I'm going to answer one of these questions myself. This will make a very good ending as well. Somebody asked, what is the forecast for the use of AI and machine learning? And, my colleague, Fern Halper, has a brand new report. If you can get your own copy at tdwi.org/BP reports. You'll see a list of best practices reports from TDWI, and there's one there on AI and machine learning. And a third of the people that she surveyed already have machine learning in production. That's higher than we expected. So I think the broader point I'm making here is that a lot of this stuff that we think of as leading edge, the early adapters are already doing it. If we look back at the data platforms we talked about earlier, Hadoop, data lakes, cloud-based database management systems, and a wide range of cloud-based data integration and other tools, the early adapters have actually been there for a few years now. So none of the stuff we're talking about today is pie in the sky or wishful thinking. This is real stuff, and sure, it's going to keep evolving. There'll be new things added to the new things, right? There'll be additional features coming. But folks, the future has a lot of options for you to consider in data management and other areas. So stay with us at TDWI. We'll be educating you further in 2020 and beyond about all these new advances. And so one last note to the audience, thank you so much for joining us today. We know you have other things to do. And also, my final thanks to the panelists. Thank you, Patrick McFadden from DataStax. Thank you, Bhupesh Malhotra from Grape City. And thank you, Colin Dover. All right, so I wish everyone a restful, relaxing, and rewarding holiday season, followed by a very productive and successful new year. Thank you.